Imagine the desert at first light, a cool hush, a thin band of gold on the horizon, and the river that makes life possible threading the land like a bright vein. Picture temples and houses clustered along that river, craftsmen lighting braziers, scribes unrolling papyrus, and a palace where a single person rises to meet the day in ways that will shape the fortunes of millions. Before we walk through those palace gates, please take a moment to subscribe to CalmChrono. If you enjoy quiet, carefully researched journeys through the past, subscribing helps us bring more episodes like this to you. The pharaoh was not simply a ruler in the way modern leaders are rulers. He was the living expression of a cosmic order, the human point where the visible world and the invisible world touched. The ancient Egyptians called the balance of the universe Ma'at, and they believed that the pharaoh had a sacred duty to keep that balance. Everything he did, down to the smallest ritual gesture, was not merely personal. It was civic, religious, and existential. When he performed offerings at the temple, the harvests, the Nile's flood, and the continued prosperity of towns and fields were thought to hang on the success of those rites. That weight shaped a life that was opulent, ritualized, constricted, and at times, terrifying. A typical day for the pharaoh began with purification. Priests washed his hands and face with water and scented oils, anointed him with fragrant unguents, and set upon him the symbols of his office. Clothing was never neutral. Linen, woven to exacting standards, and jewelry that gleamed in the sun were also signs and spells. The crook and flail represented the ruler's role as shepherd and disciplinarian, crowns declared his dominion over the two lands, and amulets placed under wrappings were active defenses against invisible threats. He moved through the palace with the deliberate care of someone acting out a cosmic script. Even small errors in ritual were believed to risk the well-being of the entire kingdom. But alongside the spiritual duties lay very earthly responsibilities. The pharaoh received petitions, settled disputes, and heard reports from his officials. His vizier, the highest administrative officer, summarized the day's tasks and presented problems to solve. Boundary disputes, grain shortages, foreign envoys to greet, or plans for new building works. Royal audiences were staged to project power. The king seated on a decorated throne, courtiers flanking him, and messengers bringing petitions from towns and temples. In those moments, the pharaoh made decisions that shaped infrastructure and law and named the officials who ran the most important offices of state. The palace itself was a world. Gardens shaded by trees, ponds frequented by birds, courtyards lined with columns, and private rooms ringed with attendants. All were part of a living machine whose function went beyond comfort. A pharaoh's household included his chief queen, a circle of secondary wives and concubines, children, a retinue of priests, and hundreds of administrators and servants. That intimate world was a politics of its own. Rival queens maneuvered for influence, sons jockeyed for standing and favor, and foreign princesses brought alliances and sometimes trouble. Marriage was a tool of statecraft. In royal circles, unions often kept power and bloodlines concentrated within the family. For the pharaoh, family ties created security and hazard in equal measure. Power, when concentrated without firm checks, can foster extremes. Some rulers used their position to reshape religion, art, and the calendar itself. One pharaoh famously altered centuries-old traditions, promoting the worship of a single solar presence and building a capital in a new desert site where his cult could be enacted without the entrenched influence of older priesthoods. These revolutions could be creative and startling, but they were also risky. The institutions that sustained Egyptian religious life had deep roots, and an abrupt restructuring of priestly privileges and temple incomes produced pushback that could last long after a king's own reign. Another persistent obsession of the pharaohs was permanence. The desire to be remembered and to live beyond mortal life pushed rulers to extraordinary investments in tombs, temples, and funerary cults. The monuments that dominate the landscape, massive stone pyramids, cliff-cut tombs, and hypostyle halls, were not vanity projects in a modern sense. They were part of a set of practices that made the pharaoh's continued existence plausible to his people and useful to the state. Building a grand tomb, ensuring a mortuary temple's rituals continued, and commissioning inscriptions that repeated a king's name were all civil acts that bound resources and labor into a long-term project of memory. Preparing the body for that afterlife involved meticulous ritual and skilled craft. Embalmers worked in sanctified spaces to remove and treat internal organs, to dry the body with salts and resins, and to wrap it in many layers of linen. Each layer, each placed amulet, each recited spell was a safeguard designed to ensure the person's identity could reunite with the body in the world beyond. The mummy was not a relic of decay but a portable, recognizable home for the life force. Coffers were filled with goods that replicated the comforts of daily life: furniture, clothing, tools, and food, because the afterlife was imagined as a continuation, not an absence. In the earliest dynasties, those preparations sometimes took forms that feel chilling today. Around certain royal enclosures, archaeologists have found rows of subsidiary burials that suggest attendants or servants were interred to accompany a king. These graves, with the intimacy of their placement and the clustering around royal monuments, tell a story of households committed to the ruler even into death. Over time, the practice shifted toward substitution. Small statuettes were placed in tombs to act magically as servants in the next life, fulfilling the same service without the human cost. But the earlier traces remain a stark reminder of how the logic of divine kingship could reach into the lives of ordinary people. Constructing funerary monuments demanded enormous organization. Quarrying, transporting, and laying stone in the desert required coordinated teams of laborers, specialized craftsmen, and overseers. Long after romantic myths of unskilled slave labor have been set aside, evidence survives of organized labor forces that were fed and housed and often respected for their craft. Villages associated with large building projects show clear signs of skilled work and communal identity. The logistics, feeding workers, providing tools, scheduling transport during the Nile seasonal cycles, read like a military campaign in peacetime. Architects and royal officials directed campaigns that mobilized manpower across regions, and the efficiency and scale of these projects still astonish modern engineers. Yet the spectacle of construction and funerary wealth existed alongside everyday life. Farmers tilled floodplain fields, traders moved goods along the river, potters and carpenters practiced their crafts, scribes copied texts, and local priests managed the calendars and minor rituals that sustained village life. The pharaoh's power touched these lives through taxation, corvée labor service for state projects, and the symbolic presence of the king's name and image in temples and shrines. On festival days, provincial and local priorities merged with royal cults as people brought offerings to local temples and participated in processions that linked their corner of the world to the central authority. Court life could be dazzling. Banquets featured finely prepared foods, musicians, dancers, and the slow choreography of ceremony where a compliment or a favor could translate into land, status, or appointment. But alongside the glitter there were intrigues. The list of royal plots and succession crises is long. Brothers who fell from favor, queens who schemed to elevate their sons, officials whose ambitions outgrew their loyalty. There are recorded trials and punishments. There are inscriptions that describe conspiracies and their brutal ends. Power bred both magnificence and paranoia, and the pharaoh was always both sovereign and target. Not every pharaoh was a tyrant or a visionary. Many ruled by consolidation and routine, preserving temple incomes, overseeing agricultural restoration projects, and maintaining treaties and trade networks. Yet the record is dominated by extremes because extremes leave marks. Temples that survive are often the work of ambitious rulers seeking immortality, and the most dramatic episodes, religious reforms, building booms, wars, are what historians return to again and again. Those episodes give texture to the centuries and allow us to see how an institution adapted, persisted, and sometimes collapsed. The pharaoh's relationship to the gods gave legitimacy to his word and his decrees. Rituals, offerings, and public spectacles transformed private authority into communal assurance that Marat endured. But the same institutions that elevated rulers also constrained them. If a pharaoh's policies upset entrenched economic or religious structures, the fallout could be swift and complicated. So while kings possessed sweeping powers, they also had to navigate a dense field of expectations, priestly privileges, and the inertia of centuries-old customs. Archaeology and modern scientific methods now let us peer behind the stone facades. Imaging technologies allow conservators to examine mummies without unwrapping them, revealing injuries and pathologies that give human detail to names that once existed only in inscriptions. Isotope analysis tracks the origin of materials and foods. Chemical traces reveal trade networks and the extent to which foreign goods circulated among elite households. These methods are not divorced from narrative. They enrich the stories and often complicate earlier assumptions about health, mobility, and the social makeup of ancient Egypt. If we pause here for a breath, it is to remind ourselves that the pharaoh's life was not only spectacle. It was also small human moments repeated under pressure. A ruler listening to a petitioner's plea, a mother teaching a child, artisans joking as they hammer a stone block, a priest carefully reciting a spell, and a palace guard watching the horizon for trouble. Within the grandeur lay the ordinary, and those human details are the bridge that lets us understand the past as a shadowed mirror of our present. Inside the palace walls, the pharaoh's household was both a family and a political engine. Queens held titles that carried sacred weight, and their influence often reached beyond domestic life. A great royal wife might act as high priestess, oversee temple endowments, and serve as regent if the king died before an heir came of age. Behind the formal titles lay a web of rivalries. Concubines could rise to power, daughters might be married to high officials to secure alliances, and sons vied for recognition as crown prince. Each birth, adoption, or marriage could shift the balance of the kingdom. Succession was rarely simple. Although primogeniture, passing the crown to the eldest son, was the ideal, politics, priestly support, and military backing often mattered more. There are records of brothers challenging brothers, mothers maneuvering behind the scenes, and generals who became pharaoh after proving their strength in war. Even when transitions were peaceful, ceremonies of coronation reaffirmed cosmic order. Priests performed rites that linked the new ruler to the gods and to the unbroken line of kings stretching back to the mythical first pharaoh. The moment was both legal and mystical, a public claim that the sun would continue to rise and the Nile would continue to flood. The drive to secure immortality was expressed most dramatically in architecture. Royal tombs were more than resting places. They were statements of divine kingship and technical mastery. Early rulers built mastabas, low, rectangular structures of mud brick, before the bold experiment that produced the step pyramid at Saqqara. From that innovation sprang the Great Pyramids of Giza, where colossal stones, each weighing tons, were cut, hauled, and set with astonishing precision. These projects were not the work of unskilled slaves but of organized laborers who lived in planned workers' villages, complete with bakeries, breweries, and medical facilities. Archaeological evidence of their diets, tools, and graffiti reveals a workforce proud of its craft. Over time, security concerns and changing religious ideas shifted royal burials from exposed pyramids to hidden tombs cut deep into the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings. Here, long corridors and richly painted chambers narrated the pharaoh's journey through the underworld. Walls came alive with scenes of deities guiding the soul past serpents, gates, and lakes of fire. Paints derived from ground minerals, lapis for blue, malachite for green, still gleam after millennia. In these halls of silence, every inscription was a spell and every image a tool to ensure safe passage into the next world. The preparation of the body itself was a marvel of devotion and science. Embalmers worked with natron salts to dry the corpse, carefully removing organs while leaving the heart, the seat of thought and morality, intact for judgment in the afterlife. Resin-coated linen was wrapped in hundreds of layers, each accompanied by prayers. Amulets in the shape of scarabs, eyes, and other protective symbols were inserted between wrappings to guard against evil. The process could take months and required expert knowledge of anatomy and chemistry, skills passed through generations of specialized priests. But the afterlife demanded more than a preserved body. Tombs were stocked with furniture, jewelry, weapons, and food, as well as small servant figurines called shabtis. These figures were thought to awaken magically to perform labor for the deceased. The goal was eternal comfort, a house of eternity where the king would dine, rule, and sail the heavens in the company of gods. The tomb itself became a microcosm of the universe, its ceilings painted with stars and its walls echoing the hymns of creation. Such grand projects required enormous resources. Vast quarries supplied limestone and granite, Expeditions to distant lands fetched cedar from Lebanon, copper from the Sinai, and gold from Nubia. The state levied taxes in grain and labor, and scribes recorded every measure. These records, preserved on papyri, show a complex economy with wages, rations, and even labor strikes. One famous papyrus recounts how workers in the Valley of the Kings stopped work when their grain payments were delayed, the earliest documented strike in history. Far from being mute subjects, these artisans knew their value and could demand justice. The pharaoh's image traveled with these materials. Colossal statues carved from single blocks of stone were placed at temple entrances, their faces idealized yet unmistakably regal. Reliefs along temple walls depicted victories in battle, royal offerings to the gods, and scenes of daily life that reinforced the king's role as maintainer of cosmic balance. To gaze upon these images was not simply to see a likeness but to encounter a living presence. The belief held that statues, when ritually activated, housed a fragment of the divine essence of the ruler. Religion saturated every aspect of governance. Major temples were economic powerhouses controlling farmland, granaries, and workshops. High priests wielded influence that sometimes rivaled the throne. The great temple complexes at Karnak and Luxor required vast staff to perform daily rituals, manage property, and keep sacred calendars. Festivals drew crowds from across the land. During the Opet festival, for example, the image of the god Ammonius traveled from Karnak to Luxor in a ceremonial bark, accompanied by music, incense, and throngs of celebrants who lined the riverbanks to watch the divine procession. Despite the grandeur, the pharaoh was not beyond vulnerability. Famine, disease, and invasion tested each reign. Records describe years when the Nile failed to flood, leading to crop failure and unrest. Foreign powers such as the Hittites, Nubians, and later the Sea Peoples challenged Egypt's borders. Military campaigns became both necessity and opportunity. Victories brought tribute and captives. Defeats could undermine a dynasty. Pharaohs who proved themselves on the battlefield were celebrated in inscriptions that combined fact with propaganda, ensuring that their courage was remembered even when the details of the battles blurred. The interplay of power, religion, and human ambition created a civilization of striking contrasts. In the same society that raised temples aligned to the stars, ordinary farmers tracked planting cycles, merchants haggled in markets, and children played games whose rules survive on scraps of papyrus. Amid this vibrant life, the pharaoh remained both a distant god and a human being, a figure whose every action was scrutinized and whose mortality could never be fully denied. The reach of Egyptian power extended far beyond the fertile Nile Valley. Pharaohs maintained complex diplomatic relationships with neighboring kingdoms through a mix of military strength, strategic marriage, and lavish gift exchange. Letters preserved in the Amarna archives, written on clay tablets in the international language of Akkadian, reveal a world where rulers addressed each other as brother and bargained for alliances. Gold from Nubia, cedar from Lebanon, and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan traveled along these routes, accompanied by emissaries bearing formal greetings and carefully chosen presents. Royal brides might journey hundreds of miles to seal treaties, their dowries recorded in meticulous detail by court scribes. While the palace engaged in high diplomacy, life for ordinary Egyptians unfolded according to the rhythms of the Nile. Most people were farmers, timing their planting and harvests to the river's flood. Wheat and barley were staples, supplemented by vegetables, dates, figs, and fish. Beer, brewed from barley and lightly fermented, served as a daily drink across all classes. Houses of mud brick lined narrow streets in villages where children played games with knucklebones and adults shared stories in the evening cool. Women managed households, wove linen, and often worked alongside men in fields or workshops. Legal records show that women could own property, inherit wealth, and represent themselves in court. Remarkable rights compared with many ancient societies. Artisans formed another vital layer of society. Stonemasons, metalworkers, painters, and carpenters produced everything from monumental statues to delicate jewelry. In the planned village of Deir el-Medina, home to the workers who cut and decorated royal tombs, archaeologists have uncovered detailed records of wages, tools, and even personal letters. Graffiti carved into limestone chips offers glimpses of humor, rivalry, and devotion to craft. These artisans understood the sacred importance of their work. Each hieroglyph, each painted star on a tomb ceiling, carried spiritual weight. Religion permeated every aspect of daily life. Families kept small household shrines, leaving offerings to protective deities such as Bes or Tauret, the hippopotamus goddess of childbirth. Annual festivals brought communities together in music and dance, honoring gods like Hathor with processions and feasts. At larger temples, priests maintained the cosmic order through daily rituals, bathing statues of gods, burning incense, and chanting hymns believed to sustain creation itself. Ordinary people rarely entered the inner sanctuaries, but they thronged temple courtyards during festivals, seeking blessings and presenting petitions. Despite the ideal of Ma'at, cosmic balance and justice, Egypt was not free of turmoil. Dynasties rose and fell as rival claimants, foreign invaders, and internal dissent tested the system. Periods of unity under strong rulers alternated with times of fragmentation known as intermediate periods, when regional governors wielded near-royal power. Foreign rulers, from the Hyksos to later Persians, sometimes seized the throne, adopting Egyptian titles and customs to legitimize their rule. Yet Egyptian culture proved remarkably resilient, absorbing influences while maintaining a distinct identity centered on the Nile and its gods. The new kingdom marked the height of Egypt's international influence. Pharaohs like Thutmose III expanded borders through military campaigns reaching deep into the Levant and Nubia. His successor Amenhotep III presided over an era of opulence and monumental building. Later, Akhenaten attempted a radical religious revolution, elevating the Aten, the sun disk, as the sole deity and relocating the capital to a new city, Akhetaten. His reign disrupted traditional priestly power but collapsed after his death, restoring the old gods and paving the way for the boy king Tutankhamun. Ramses II, known as Ramses the Great, epitomized the might and ambition of the new kingdom. He fought the Hittites at the famous Battle of Kadesh, signing one of history's earliest recorded peace treaties. His building projects were unparalleled. Colossal statues at Abu Simbel, grand halls at Karnak, and a city, Pyramus, constructed as a display of royal authority. He ruled for over 6 decades, leaving behind more inscriptions and monuments than perhaps any other pharaoh. Yet even his long reign could not halt the gradual decline that followed. As centuries passed, pressures mounted. Successive invasions by Libyans, Nubians, Assyrians, and Persians chipped away at Egypt's independence. Economic strains, overextended borders, and shifts in trade routes weakened central control. When Alexander the Great arrived in 332 BCE, many Egyptians welcomed him as a liberator. His general Ptolemy established a dynasty that blended Greek and Egyptian traditions, ruling for nearly 3 centuries until the dramatic reign of Cleopatra VII and the Roman conquest in 30 BCE. Through it all, the core ideals of Egyptian civilization endured: reverence for the Nile, belief in the afterlife, and the conviction that the pharaoh, whether native or foreign-born, was the vital link between gods and humanity. Even as political power waned, the art, architecture, and spiritual vision of ancient Egypt continued to inspire. Even after their political power faded, the pharaoh's presence never truly disappeared. Their temples and tombs stood as silent guardians of memory, luring explorers, scholars, and dreamers across millennia. Greek travelers like Herodotus marveled at the Great Pyramid, while Roman emperors collected obelisks as symbols of their own might. Centuries later, European adventurers pried open-sealed tombs, igniting the discipline we now call Egyptology. Each discovery, from the Rosetta Stone to the treasures of Tutankhamun, added new layers to the story while reminding the world how much still lies buried beneath the desert sands. Modern science continues the exploration with tools the ancient builders could never imagine. CT scans, DNA analysis, and chemical testing peel back layers of mystery. We can trace royal bloodlines, identify ancient diseases, and even recreate the diets of long-dead nobles. Yet for every question answered, others emerge. What private doubts haunted these god-kings? Did they believe their massive monuments would truly make them eternal? Perhaps their greatest success is that we still ask. The pharaohs' appeal endures because their lives capture the full spectrum of the human condition. They wielded near-absolute power, commanding armies and shaping landscapes. They also suffered rivalries, family conflicts, and the same fears of mortality that touch us all. Their monuments speak of staggering ambition. Their mummies whisper of fragility. In their triumphs and failures, we glimpse our own desire for meaning and remembrance. Today, standing before the pyramids or gazing at a painted coffin lid, we meet people who lived thousands of years ago yet remain vividly present. Their art, their words, their engineering genius, all testify to a civilization both profoundly different from and strikingly similar to our own. Thank you for journeying through the world of the pharaohs with us. If you enjoyed this deep exploration of ancient Egypt's power, mystery, and enduring influence, please like this video and subscribe to CalmChrono for more richly detailed histories from across the ages. Before you go, here's a question to ponder. If you possessed the resources of a pharaoh and could leave one monument or achievement to be remembered for thousands of years, what would it be, and why? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your ideas keep the conversation alive, just as the pharaohs' stories continue to live today. Until next time, keep exploring the past and discovering the timeless questions that connect us all.